Good afternoon. My name is Molly Heintz, and today I'm going to talk to you about how designers create not just objects, buildings, or systems, but also how they design themselves. This identity is something we consume, much like any product, and it's something that impacts, and sometimes clouds, our perception of a designer's output. It's therefore worthy of critique just as much as any product. Designers who have achieved a certain level of celebrity are liable to become part of a cycle of being known for their well-knownness, to borrow a phrase from the historian Daniel Boorstin, rather than on the merits of their work. And the exponential nature of celebrity is only amplified today with the internet and social media. On the one hand, this phenomenon gives high-profile designers a disproportionate amount of power and access to power. On the other, it has the benefit of bringing the attention of the general public to the design field, as it did when industrial design was still developing as a profession. Let's go back in time for a moment, specifically to 1951. In 1951, Never Leave Well Enough Alone, the memoir of industrial designer Raymond Loewy, was published. The quote, "One must be a work of art or wear a work of art," is taken from Oscar Wilde and appeared on the first page. Never Leave Well Enough Alone received mixed reviews. In the New York Times, critic Peter Blake wrote, "In this packaged 100,000-word after-dinner speech, Loewy is selling himself." But the selling had started long before. Here, Loewy is highlighted in the copy for a 1940 ad for Studebaker. Styled by Raymond Loewy, ace designer of the Broadway Limited, famed visualist of the 1939 New York World's Fair. It's notable that the picture here is not of Raymond Loewy, but of the French designer, Jean Patou. In 1940, Loewy may have been famed that he was not famous enough to be a celebrity spokesperson. But 10 years later, he is. Allow me to introduce you to Mr. Raymond Loewy. This is an ad for Air France that ran in the New Yorker in 1950. Air France at the time wasn't a client of Loewy. They just wanted the Loewy endorsement, which reads, "At least once a year, Mrs. Loewy and I fly round trip on Air France to visit my office in England and our homes in France. We prefer Air France because of the food, the service, the exceptional courtesy of everyone, and the sense of luxury on board." Loewy was part of the first generation of industrial designers in the US. He immigrated from France in 1919 when he was in his 20s, and 30 years later, he was practically a household name. How? I suggest that Loewy's trajectory, and that of other designers I'll discuss today, is rooted in first, the establishment of a creation myth, a romanticized story of the designer's beginnings. Second, a distinctive and highly codified personal appearance. Third, powerful agents, publicists, clients, and the media acting on behalf of the designer. And finally, a means of amplification that gives the designer's image a life of its own, one that is often quite separate from any actual design work. In Loewy's case, the myth was a rags to riches tale of him coming from France to make his way in America, one that is laid out in colorful detail and Never Leave Well Enough Alone. In terms of his appearance, Loewy played up his continental background, retaining a heavy French accent throughout his life and tapping into an American affinity, particularly after World War II, for all things French, from Charles Boyer to Chanel perfume. The image you see of Loewy here remains remarkably consistent throughout his career. Let's break it down, shall we? A pompadour perfectly coiffed with pomade. The black mustache, which stayed very black indeed right up until his death. The pocket square, cufflinks, and last but not least, lest you forget he designed the packaging for Lucky Strike, cigarette. This is the image of Loewy that we see again and again in advertising. Here, in a late 1950s ad for the Cosmopolitan line, he designed for shoemakers' fabrics and wall coverings. Notice that in addition to the designer's image, there's Loewy's signature. In this ad for Coquel, a division of Le Creuset, you have all the elements coming together. The Loewy name, the Loewy image, the Loewy signature. But what I think makes the ad really interesting is that when it ran in 2005, Loewy had been dead almost 9 years. But the Loewy brand still had magic, at least in the eyes of Coquel. So somewhere between Studebaker and Schumacher, Loewy became a celebrity. These images of Loewy's Palm Springs home ran in Life magazine in the late 1940s, and you see that, in fact, he very much lived the life of a Hollywood star. But Loewy's celebrity wasn't his doing alone. At his side professionally was Elizabeth Reese, or Betty as she was known, who was his in-house publicist for almost 30 years. Loewy's work first caught Reese's attention at the 1939 World's Fair, and she signed on at Raymond Loewy Associates and began handling all of Loewy's PR. She produced photo shoots, she organized photographers to follow Loewy and his wife on trips, but most of all, she handled the press. By the end of her career, Reese had a very close relationship with many journalists. Here's an unpublished note to Betty from Guy Henley, the editor of House Beautiful, in 1967. The note was attached to proofs of a forthcoming article about Loewy and says, "Betty, here are uncorrected page proofs. This is your last chance. But please do not make any unnecessary changes. Let me know anything crucial, Guy." From a journalistic point of view, allowing this kind of input from someone so close to the subject is usually considered ethically questionable. But it shows that Betty Reese had an extended dialogue about the article with this particular editor, and it suggests she has had significant insider access with the media. Reese may be best known for helping secure the cover of Time magazine for Loewy in October of 1949. But what many people don't know is that this was the third win in a Triple Crown year. Not only was Loewy on the much coveted cover of Time, a few months earlier in August, he was featured in Reader's Digest, which had the second largest circulation in the country at the time, about 7 million per year. This article was a condensed version of a feature that had appeared the preceding May in Life, the magazine with the highest circulation in the US at the time, 8 million. The feature article by John Kobler was called The Great Packager. So now we understand why in 1950 Loewy's image was desirable for Air France to include in their ad, and why the New York Times thought Loewy's 1951 book worth reviewing. But what about today? I'd like to look at two designers whom I think are taking a page from the Loewy playbook. Karim Rashid is a designer with a very distinctive public identity that has been amplified by his client relationships. And when he was 13, Rashid remembers his father giving him a book about Raymond Loewy. Rashid said in a recent interview, "I saw that he did spaceships, Coca-Cola bottles, the packaging for Lucky Strike cigarettes. And I went, this is what I want to do." Rashid was born in Cairo in 1960 to Egyptian-British parents and mainly raised in Canada. He says his longtime affinity for the color pink also developed at a young age. Rashid got his big break in the late 1990s with the Canadian housewares company, Umbra. As a designer, Rashid was always interested in making his mark, literally. In his first jobs for other companies, he would secretly embed his own symbols into design molds. He told me, quote, "Like when one carves their initials on a park bench. I had some perverse idea that many years later I would find a product in a flea market and see my tag in it," end quote. So when Rashid began working with Umbra, it was a dream come true. Not only did they let him put his name on the bottom of his first design for them, the Garbino trash can, but they put his name and his picture on the tag. And now Karim's signature is his trademark. It's been shortened to just his first name, like Madonna or Cher, with an X over the I. Here it is in an ad for another Umbra product in the window of the store, on a dispenser of Method soap, and on the email signature that is used by the staff in his office. But Rashid is still using his symbols today. Here's the more fully developed system of hieroglyphs. He's using them most notably on himself. The designer's body has now become the tagged object, as well as using them to tag design environments like the subway station he just completed in Naples. Very different from Rashid, but no less present, thanks to extensive media coverage, is Yves Bahar. Born in 1967 in Switzerland to Turkish and German parents, Bahar moved to the States when in design school and founded his own company, Fuse Project, in San Francisco in the late 1990s. His best-known designs are the leaf lamp and sail chair, both for Herman Miller, and the design of computer for the One Laptop Per Child project. Bahar also openly references Loewy. In December, he told the New York Times, "I truly believe that we're about to enter a second golden age of design. The first one was in the 50s and 60s when designers like Raymond Loewy, Charles Eames, George Nelson, and Dieter Rams were shepherds of the brands they were working with. They had influence over their products and how companies communicated and promoted themselves. But often the focus seems to end up on the shepherd rather than his flock of brands. Like Lowy, the photogenic Bahar is beloved by the media. One ecstatic writer even described him as a man-child with an angelic face. Bahar projects a very casual, accessible image. On Twitter, anyone can follow his glamorous-sounding travels and sympathize with his passing thoughts. And whereas Betty Reese and Guy Hindley exchanged notes behind the scenes, Bahar and the design website Dezeen, for example, had a direct exchange that has an aura of transparency and informality. But this too is a designed image, and a case in which the lines between media and PR began to be fundamentally and problematically blurred. It's true that you don't get to participate in the World Economic Forum and hang out with global bigwigs, as Eve Bahar did recently, or meet with presidents, like Raymond Lowy did, by hiding your light under a bushel. And it's important that designers step into these roles. But both as future designers, as clients, as media, and as consumers, we need to be aware of whom we're empowering and propelling forward as public figures. We need to consider how it's happening, how it's being amplified, and ask to what standards and level of responsibility we want to hold our de facto design leaders. Thank you.
Somali. Do designers have to brand themselves to be successful nowadays?
I think designers do have to be aware of how they're coming across in the world, and I think just in terms of fundamentally, designers need to be good communicators to accomplish a project in order to communicate their ideas to clients, to help clients articulate their own goals. Designers have to be good communicators. And, but in a competitive marketplace, designers also need to be aware of how they're essentially marketing themselves. Some designers, let's say, brand themselves much more than others. But I think it is something that is very much kind of part of the discourse in terms of what's happening inside the design studio today.
But it's interesting, using the comparison of Lowy, has anything changed, or is it just amplified nowadays?
I think actually it has not changed radically other than the sheer volume of media and media opportunities available. And with the internet especially, that has kind of thrown things for a bit of a loop. In the sense that the internet or Google, let's say, has very much of a kind of equalizing effect on what you see. And so whereas, maybe Time, the cover of Time magazine was the gold standard in Lowy's day, we really don't have that one cover that to be coveted today. It's much more diffuse.
And tell us a little bit more about Elizabeth Reese. I mean, she seems like an incredibly intriguing and powerful person.
Yes, she is a fascinating character, and I was fortunate to be able to speak to people that knew her and worked with her professionally, including Ralph Kaplan, who's in our audience today. And I'm sure Ralph won't mind me saying that when he was editor-in-chief of ID magazine, he was constantly being taken out to lunch by publicists, and he told me that Betty Reese was the only publicist he took to lunch. But she, I think, was very influential in Lowy's office, and she actually kept quite a low profile herself. She didn't like to be photographed. She was, I think, much more comfortable behind the scenes, as in that image we saw where she was directing a shoot, actually for Life magazine, and she actually was good friends with architect Andrew Geller, who worked in the Lowy office, and I was able to speak with his son, Greg Geller, and Greg worked as an intern with Reese and actually helped systematically cull clippings. They were really, really methodical about keeping the press clippings, and yeah.
Which is interesting. You stated very clearly, it comes through your presentation, the amount of work was done, the amount of work that designers did in terms of branding and designing themselves. But I was struck, were they also beginning to design the outlines of celebrity? That it's the origin myth and then this kind of PR machine that they themselves were designing, putting into action.
Yeah, no, the creation myth especially, I think, is a really interesting aspect. And, I think, there is some level of revisionist history that goes on with everyone in the world when they talk about themselves as a child or how they got started. And what's interesting with these public figures who have to speak in front of an audience and kind of give a sense of who they are and their background, these stories become very codified, and you start to hear them over and over again. And I think when I say myth, that's not to say that this is made up, but I think it becomes kind of its own special story.
So should designers unbrand themselves, unravel the story?
Well, I think I don't think that, but I do think that there needs to be an awareness on the part of, absolutely on the part of journalists, of course, but also on the part of consumers, that they are receiving a product that's been designed in the form of this designer image. And so I think it's more of an awareness on the people on the receiving end.
Thank you.